But if you don't deal with the disease, it will only get worse, and then it may be too late. How many young people have you lost to the streets of Philadelphia, to fentanyl? The global elites control the mainstream media, they finance campaigns, district attorneys, to mention a few. What backing does the Fed have for that money being printed? The Treasury bonds themselves. So basically, you finance the government by printing money out of thin air.
Welcome back to RattlesnakeTV, guys. In this video, we are going to be covering the recent speech from El Salvadorian President Nayib Bukele at CPAC. Now, the reason I wanted to cover this is because the story of Bukele and what he has done with El Salvador should resonate in a big way with Americans, especially those living in Democrat-run major cities like Chicago, Los Angeles, and New York. Now, for a little bit of context, for those of you who haven't looked into this too much, Bukele has gained a lot of notoriety over the past few years due to the fact that he has been able to remedy some of the major issues plaguing El Salvador, namely the gangs. El Salvador is home to one of the most feared criminal gangs in the world, namely MS-13. And until recently, El Salvador wasn't really on anybody's list of potential next destinations for a vacation. But now that has all changed, and in a ridiculously short time period, with El Salvador going from the most dangerous country in the world with the highest murder rate in the world to the safest country in the Southern Hemisphere. A feat that seems completely impossible and totally unimaginable. And this is why Bukele has just been elected again in a fair democratic election with over 84% of the vote. You see, the reason why this should resonate, though, is because crime is often something that is talked about in conservative political circles. But when you put it in perspective with the rest of the world, it makes you realize how truly ridiculous and unnecessary it is to be having such unbelievable levels of crime in major American cities. So let's get into the speech, and I'm going to provide a little bit of context and commentary throughout.
Well, I know, of course, El Salvador is a lot smaller country. Setting aside the differences, there's a similarity with what is happening here in the United States. We also had many apparently isolated problems in the 60s and the 70s, and we failed to realize as a country the severity of them until it became a civil war. By the time we reacted, it was already too late. We were already boiled like the frog. And it took us 50 years, 2 wars, 250,000 lives, and a third of our population displaced, and a near miracle to get our country back. As your friend, I want to issue this warning so you don't make the same mistakes we did in the 60s and the 70s. It is not easy to pull yourself back once you're in boiling water. In fact, all the experts said it was impossible. And besides, you don't want to wait 50 years and maybe hope for a miracle to get out of hell. You can still jump before the water boils. Some might say I'm exaggerating, but we can clearly see the signs of a declining society because our own hit rock bottom decades ago. It's like when we see someone getting sick. First, it's maybe just stomachache, or a headache, or a small fever. But if you don't deal with the disease, it will only get worse, and then it may be too late. Even after our first war in El Salvador, we failed again to look into the signs of the second civil war that was coming, the gang war. After 1 million people fled the first war, a lot of them came to live in ghettos here in the United States, where the gangs were formed. When former President Clinton deported a lot of those gang members without telling us they were gang members, they were criminals. They roamed free and recruited young people, thousands of young Salvadorans, to join the gangs. At first, they seemed like petty criminals, but they began to change and transform until they became the unscrupulous terrorists that we know today. Most of them even perform satanic rituals, and this has been well documented. The government back then didn't deal with the disease, nor did the next administration, nor did the ones after that. The disease that had begun with mild symptoms got worse and worse. It became a cancer that seemed incurable. We are already seeing these symptoms in the United States. Big cities in decline like Baltimore, Portland, New York, just to name a few. Places where crime and drugs have become the daily norm and even accepted and promoted by the government. How many young people have you lost to the streets of Philadelphia or San Francisco, to fentanyl? Did we see these apocalyptic sights 15, 10, 5 years ago? Can you imagine how it will be in the next 5, 10, or 15 years?
So that's a really important point there, guys. Think about where it was 15 years ago in terms of crime and in terms of the fentanyl epidemic. It didn't even really exist then. And then think about where it could be in 5, 10, 15 years. Obviously, it's not slowing down. Obviously, it's only getting way worse. So unless something seriously and drastically changes, the logical conclusion of this epidemic is that it becomes totally unmanageable and uncontrollable and completely destroys these cities. And if you do live in America, then it's almost as though this issue is something that's always in the news and it's almost becoming normalized. And it actually is not something that should be normal, and it's not normal. Even if you go to countries that are far, far poorer than the United States, they're much, much safer. I spent last year traveling around the world. I went to different parts of East Asia, Southeast Asia, all around Europe and America as well. And the most dangerous place that my brother and I ever visited was Los Angeles. Downtown LA is where we felt the most unsafe. It is very, very unusual to have people who are high on drugs in the middle of the road in dozens in the middle of a major city. This just doesn't really happen in other places. This is something that is just not okay, and it's something that could clearly be fixed, and Bukele is a good example of how it could be fixed. And just for a quick story here, last year I was staying in Los Angeles and I had to walk somewhere from my hotel room, and I thought it was a decent area. But I literally walked 3 streets and the buildings and the houses just started to get more and more dilapidated. And then I started to see groups of gangs on the side of the road drinking alcohol. And I started to notice that there was a real theme of red around me. Everybody seemed to be wearing red. There were red sheets hung from houses and there were a lot of red cars. And after about 10 seconds of observing this, I quickly realized that I was right in the middle of the ghetto. I was right in the middle of a Bloods neighborhood. And I am very much a white boy from Australia. So I quickly got out of there. But the moral of the story is that you can be in one of these major cities in the United States. You take the wrong turn and all of a sudden you are in serious danger. This is something that you should probably expect when you're in Colombia, but not when you're in the United States. Anyways, let's get on to the next part about police, law, and order, which is particularly pertinent here.
The global elites, they hate our success, and they fear yours. The people's free will to choose their leaders is something they despise because they cannot control that. You have experienced this firsthand here in the United States. The global elites control the mainstream media, they finance campaigns, district attorneys, to mention a few. They abuse their powers. They persecute political opponents. In El Salvador, we don't weaponize our judicial system to persecute our political opponents. A practice that may sound familiar to you, but we don't do that there. And who's the dictator? The global elites in the media, they work in conjunction, they run some stories and publish them, same pictures to reinforce their agendas. You're no strangers to that here in the United States. We deal with that in El Salvador too. That is the free press that they talk about? Please. I always criticize the defenders of institutionalism. Not because I don't think strong institutions are paramount and necessary for a democracy, but because I find them very hypocritical. They don't seem to have the same standards for themselves as they are trying to impose on others. But there's yet another component that is more dangerous than a simple double standard. Institutions were created to serve the people and not the other way around. Somewhere along the way, those people forgot their fundamental purpose, which is more important than the institution itself. When the judicial system was created, it was created out of the necessity to bring justice. But now, it seems like survival and control of the judges, of the AGs, among others, are paramount. And the need to bring justice is merely a little more than an afterthought. Another example, the police was created to bring law and order. Let them seek law and order then. But now some of them are even afraid to do their job because they fear the consequences for doing it. They should be encouraged to fulfill their foundational roles without fear of repercussions that distract them from their missions. If the police was created to bring law and order, let them bring law and order. If the judicial system was created to bring justice, let them bring justice. Let them protect their purpose at all costs. Same goes with the press. Let them be free. A democracy needs a free press. But to enjoy that membership, you must adhere to your duty as a reporter. Report the facts. Don't be a puppet of those who finance you or finance the organizations that you work for.
So this point here about law and order is one that Bukele is a real authority on, and it's a point that should make the lawmakers in New York, Chicago, Los Angeles, and cities like this bow their heads in shame. The utter absurdity of the fact that whilst crime is so unbelievably rampant in these cities, these politicians are wasting their time and taxpayer dollars talking about how they can defund the police. And as the bubble of crime continues to grow, the police force continues to shrink and become more and more demoralized. Please somebody riddle me that. And furthermore, whilst the evidence of all of this crime, looting, gang crime, inner city shootings and drug dealing that's leading to copious amounts of fentanyl overdoses is literally in front of our eyes. We can log on to Twitter and see 50 new videos a day about it. The politicians and the fake news media will then gaslight you and say that the biggest threat to national security is white supremacy.
Bad power!
But this is the logic of feminized beta liberals. They would rather sit there and virtue signal and say the things that sound fluffy, rather than having some actual testicular fortitude and saying the things that need to be said and addressing the uncomfortable issues with courage and a plan. Because sometimes if you really want to stamp out the problem, you've got to be tough, and desperate times call for desperate measures. And I do believe with these major cities, that is the situation that they're in right now. But these people, they lack a spine. And with that in mind, let's check out another clip where Bukele is responding to a BBC journalist who questions him about the work he's doing. This is how you should respond.
One point on that, of course,
Yes.
though, is that 75,000 people in the space of a year isn't regularly arrested by police anywhere else in the world, and that this is a unique situation with unique powers given to the security forces to make arrests on site according to criteria deemed by them.
Yes, of course, because you don't live in the world murder capital. So when you don't live in the world murder capital, it's because you don't have enough murderers to fill a prison like ours. Because the difference is that in the UK is not the world murder capital. El Salvador was, by your own accounts, the world murder capital. So if we have the world murder capital, the most dangerous place in the world, the place in the world with the most murders, why is that? Because we have the place in the world with the biggest amount of murderers. So of course, you cannot arrest 70,000 people because you don't have 70,000 murderers because you're not the murder capital of the world. So why do we have the biggest incarceration rate in the world? Because we changed the murder capital of the world's most dangerous country, into the safest country in the Western Hemisphere. And the only way to do that is to arrest all the murderers. There's no other way to do it. Well, the other way to be to kill all the murderers, but we don't have death penalty, so we have to arrest all the murderers. So you say, why is such a big number? Well, what do you expect? That we arrest 100 people and we leave 69,900 gang members in the streets and suddenly the murder rate will drop? Or do you expect that because we're Salvadorans or something, because we're second-class citizens or something, we have to die? They have to kill our families, they have to kill our children, because your liberal ideas of what a democracy should be have to be respected, and since we're not using your recipe, then we have to be killed, we have to let our children be killed, we have to let the bloodshed to go on for 50 years because of imported policies from your countries, because your countries had lecturers in the 80s, the war. You had a fight with the Soviet Union, had nothing to do with us. What did you do? You financed El Salvador to fight a war between us, between brothers. And we killed each other, and 85,000 Salvadorans died. After that, 1 million displaced. They went to the US, into ghettos. They formed the gangs, then they deport the gangs. Gangs come here. You send us another recipe. Law to don't arrest minors. Okay, but all the gang members were minors at the time. So gangs grew, and then they terrorized the country. They started killing people, and we became the murder capital of the world. Nobody could solve it. We took the recipes from the OAS, we took the recipes from the UN, we took the recipes from the European Union, we took the recipes from the United States. None of the recipes worked. More bloodshed, more people were dying. So what do? Okay, we do something and we save people. And now we're the safest country in the Western Hemisphere. But suddenly something's bad. Oh, but you shouldn't do that. You should do what I think you should do. Why? Not only we have the right to do what we think is right, and what the Salvadoran people are going to decide whether or not they want this day in free elections, but also we've proven it works. And you haven't proven that your system works in our country. Might work in yours, I don't know. But it doesn't work in ours. It's like I told one time a member of the European Union, I know you Brexited that, but I told a member of the European Union, you take your best government, choose your best government. I don't know what's the best government in Europe, but you choose your best government. Same people, same talent, same experts, same will to do things the right way. You take your best government and you put them to govern Afghanistan and tell them, okay, you govern Afghanistan the same way you govern this European country. They'll be dead in a week because you cannot govern Afghanistan like you govern Europe. So stop trying to make us use your recipes because they don't work here. You have your own system. We don't tell you that you shouldn't have a monarchy. I mean, we're fine with your monarchy. We love your monarchy. It's fine. But we don't say, oh, you shouldn't have a monarchy and you shouldn't have hereditary titles. Why? Because it's your country. You can do whatever you want with it. But suddenly, we have to do what you want to do with our country.
So it's hard to argue with that there. And he holds his own and he stands on his principles. You got to respect it. Now on to the next clip where he talks a little bit about the financial system, which I found very interesting. You probably will too. Let's check it out.
America should listen to these words, not because the El Salvador model should be replicated here, but because these specific examples apply to any nation that has lost or is losing its way. Ask yourself why this is happening, who is supporting it, and whether it's by ignorance or by choice. And fight it. Fight it with all your heart and soul, and be the beacon of hope. And be the beacon of hope that your founding fathers, with all their faults like every human being has, dreamt for your country. Fight for your freedoms, for your rights. Fight for the original purpose of these institutions and not their mere existence. It's still not too late. It can be done. It is time to erase these new paradigms that have been imposed in the recent years that make no sense. If you just free your minds from those invisible chains, you could do it. This shift is an extremely dangerous trend that undermines these institutions. Effectiveness and their credibility is at stake, both home and abroad. This is a warning from a friend. You should adhere to their foundational principles and purposes and denounce this new institutionalism. Now, you would think that's it, as it wasn't enough, right? But unfortunately, there's more. There are other symptoms that are even more difficult to diagnose. For instance, the financial situation of the United States. When I talk to my conservative friends right here, they always tell me that the problem is high taxes. But they're wrong. Of course, high taxes are extremely high here in the United States. I give you that. You're right in that. But that's not the real problem. The real problem is not the high taxes themselves, but the fact that they are not even really funding the government. Not even those high taxes, higher than a lot of places in the world, not even those taxes are really funding the government. So who's financing the government? Government is financed by treasury bonds, paper. And who buys the treasury bonds? Mostly the Fed. And how does the Fed buy them? By printing money. But what backing does the Fed have for that money being printed? The treasury bonds themselves. So basically, you finance the government by printing money out of thin air. Someone could ask, well, so if the government can print the limited amounts of money out of thin air, why do they collect taxes? I mean, in theory, it would make sense, right? If they can print unlimited amounts of money, why would they need taxes for? The answer is simple, but it's very shocking. The real problem is that you pay high taxes only to uphold the illusion that you are funding the government, which you are not. It's shocking, but it's true. The government is funded by money printing, paper backed with paper, a bubble that will inevitably burst. The situation is even worse than it seems, because if most Americans and the rest of the world were to become aware of this farce, confidence in your currency would be lost, the dollar would fall, and the Western civilization with it. If the next president of the United States doesn't make the necessary policies and structural changes, sooner or later that bubble will burst. There's still time. You don't have to make the same mistakes we did in the 60s and the 70s. You can still jump before the water boils.
So very interesting stuff there, and he kind of said the quiet part out loud, to be honest. I mean, many experts would echo this sort of sentiment, that the US financial system is in big trouble. They believe that at the minimum, there is a big recession around the corner. Many also believe that the dollar could, in the not so distant future, lose its position as the global reserve currency, which would completely flip the world order on its head. So I guess that's fair warning by Bukele. But my takeaway from that is that the world is changing at a breakneck speed, and those who don't adapt will be left behind. And Bukele, like others around the world, is a forward-thinking leader. He's not afraid to do what's tough, but what's best for the country. And this forward-thinking approach, and not just doing what is politically expedient in the moment, has obviously paid dividends for him and his country. This is a guy who's seen the problem and stamped out the problem. He's looking at the future and welcoming new technologies such as cryptocurrencies. He's putting in place tax-friendly policies for tech companies, and he's friendly towards entrepreneurship. The way I see it is that Bukele is kind of like a prototype of what the next generation of powerful and effective politicians might look like. Vivek Ramaswamy is another good example of it. But that's enough from me, guys. Really interested to hear your thoughts about all of this. I mean, obviously, if El Salvador have stamped out crime and have done such an effective job, then the greatest empire in the history of the earth can also do it. So find my links below, guys. Check me out there. If you'd like to subscribe, boom, right here. And if you'd like to watch another video, right here. Till next time, I'm Jake. This is RattlesnakeTV, keeping you armed and dangerous.